As most of you know, the Forum Women in Global Development was founded by the Chicago Council in 2009 as a way to start an important conversation on global women's issues. In the past, the Forum has featured discussions on health, on trafficking, on children, on education, with speakers like Milan Fervier, Helene Gale, and Carly Fiorina. The lead sponsor for the Forum is Abbott, and we're very glad and fortunate to have 9 other patrons, sponsors that are listed on your biography. But without their sponsorship, this would not be possible. We're here today during the week of Mother's Day, and happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers in this audience here today, to discuss the state of the world's mothers. This is also the week that Save the Children releases its annual report providing insights into the health and the education and the rights of women and children throughout the world. This year's report, which was just released, focuses specifically on women and children in crisis zones, both that are made by humans and that are naturally occurring. This is an important topic. The report suggests that 95% of disaster fatalities occur in developing countries, and that 56% of maternal and child deaths take place in fragile settings. The 2014 report also continues the tradition of ranking countries based on where it is most or least safe to be a mother in the world. Discussions like today will help us to understand which areas need the most focus. To quote one of our own Chicagoans and formal council speakers, Fumi Olopade, where you live should not determine whether you live. I'm excited to hear from our speakers here today. I'm also very pleased that we have representatives from so many different institutions this afternoon. Today's event was made possible by the collaboration of 4 institutions who worked very closely together to bring the conversation that we're going to have to as many people as possible. So I'd like to thank the Chicago Foundation for Women, the International Women Associates, and Save the Children for their partnership and their support. You will hear from each of the 4 institutions today, and I urge you to take the time to get to know all of them. Now, at this point, I would like to welcome to the stage the President of the International Women Association, Margot Bennett.
Thank you, Ivo. As Ivo mentioned, 4 institutions work together to bring the discussion today. In particular, I would like to thank Gay-Young Cho, who is the immediate past president of International Women Associates, and Pernilla Lopez from Save the Children, who initiated this project about a year ago. The Chicago Council, Chicago Foundation for Women, Save the Children, and International Women Associates are nonprofits who share very different missions, but we all share the value of dialogue and collaboration and how we can overcome some of the biggest challenges around the world. The State of the World's Mothers Report has consistently covered important topics around mothers and children. And some of the subjects they've covered are nutrition in the first 1,000 days, vaccinations, contraception, education, all from a global perspective. The global aspect of today's discussion connects very well with the work of IWA. IWA was founded in 1978 by Doe Thornburg. She has an Order of the British Empire. Unfortunately, Doe can't be with us today, but she told me she's very much with us in spirit. IWA is a Chicago area forum that connects women with diverse international backgrounds. Our members try to put global understanding into practice through programs of education, support, and service. We enrich the lives of our members through participation in shared experiences and cross-cultural exchanges and friendship. Our vision is to create a more just and peaceful world through mutual respect and understanding. And we work with individuals whose goals are harmonious with our mission, and we advocate for universal human rights, especially for women and girls. So to support that vision, each fall, IWA honors a woman who has made a significant contribution in her chosen field globally, or a woman who is working internationally to advance human rights. Recent honorees of our Women Extraordinaire program include Catherine Bertini, who as Executive Director of the United Nations World Food Programme helped millions of victims of natural disasters and wars. We also honored Connie Duckworth, whose unique social business model helps Afghan women weavers and their families to break out of the cycle of poverty through providing a steady stream of income and offering them access to education and healthcare. And of course, Marjorie Benton was one of our honorees, and she has dedicated her life to help improve the lives of women and children around the world. IWA offers community service, providing tutoring, mentoring, and educational enhancement programs for low-income refugee and immigrant children. These children face many barriers to a successful assimilation into their new country and the Chicago community. And our members, who represent 60 countries and 40 languages, are uniquely positioned to help these children through the challenges of assimilation and adaptation to the country. And so I'm excited about today's lunch because it's allowed so many of us to come together and to develop a better understanding of the challenges that women and children face in times of crisis. So I would echo Ivo and encourage all of you to talk to each other, discuss the crisis that we're facing, and to think about ways that we can collaborate here in Chicago and sort of just keep the conversation going in the weeks and months to come. So now I would like to thank you very much for coming here and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sujata. I am the president and CEO of the Chicago Foundation for Women. Chicago Foundation for Women is pleased to partner with International Women Associates, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and Save the Children for this very important discussion. Chicago Foundation for Women could not but participate in this conversation as an organization committed to basic rights and equal opportunities for women and girls in the region. We believe that when women and girls are secure, whole communities are made better. CFW focuses on the most pressing challenges: freedom from violence, enhancing economic security, and access to healthcare, and supports the most effective solutions. You'll hear a little bit later, according to the 2014 State of the World's Mothers reports, the risk that a 15-year-old girl will die during her lifetime from a maternal cause has increased by 50% in America, from 1 in 3,700 to 1 in 2,400. Chicago Foundation for Women is addressing these very issues here in Chicago. Through our support, an organization called Options for Youth has dramatically reduced and delayed second pregnancies for teenage moms, and their graduation rates are twice the national average for pregnant and parenting teens. Young mothers learn to parent while staying in school, thus addressing the interconnected challenges of health and economic security. Today's conversation is about understanding how to create a region and a world that is safe for mothers so their children have a chance to reach their full potential. The expert panel will help us understand the challenges worldwide through the 2014 State of the World's Mothers Report. It is my privilege to introduce the panelists. Carolyn Miles is the president and CEO of Save the Children. She's been with the organization since 1998, and during her tenure, the institution has doubled the number of children they've been able to support. Roger Thoreau is a senior fellow on global agriculture and food at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Roger spent 3 decades as a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. His current project is a book that explores nutrition and healthcare in the 1,000-day window from the beginning of a woman's pregnancy to her child's second birthday. Our conversation will be moderated by none other than Cokie Roberts. Cokie is a world-renowned reporter currently contributing to ABC News and National Public Radio. She's won 3 Emmys, is in the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame, and is on the Board of Trustees at Save the Children. After the conversation, Neve King of the Chicago Council will moderate the audience Q&A. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carolyn, Roger, and Cokie.
We're not gonna do it separately. You all break into each. So, I'm Cokie, this is Carolyn, that's Roger. You probably figured out which one was Roger. Yeah.
It's tough.
But we are thrilled to be here, and it is really terrific to have these organizations come together to do this. Margot said at the beginning that they have different interests, but it's not really true, Margot. The interests are very, very much on the same page. And when Eva was saying, global women's issues are women's issues, and women's issues are global issues. And what we know, and I am a really intensely data-driven person, which is a good thing in a reporter, basically. You like that. But what we do know is that you educate a girl, you save a country. And it is this single biggest thing in development in terms of success. And so we have to sort of keep pushing the boulder up the mountain over and over and over again. And this year's State of the World's Mothers Report unfortunately reminds us of that again. Because I am such a data-driven person, I hit the point in my life where I had to finally put my body where my mouth was, because I have been saying for many, many, many years that a woman like me who went directly into the workforce from college had an obligation at some point in her life, if she could afford it, to do the kinds of things that many of our mothers did in the community. And it was finally time for me to, put up or shut up. And so I then started researching to see where I could do something where it would be effective. Because one of the things we know in the Women's Foundation knows this better than anybody, because they are so incredibly diligent in what they fund and the people that come together for the Women's Foundation. And this is now a movement around the country, the Women's Foundations around the country. And what I wanted to do was be efficacious. And that's what we've discovered in women's philanthropy, is that people have absolutely no interest in being goody-goodies. We want, we want our efforts, our time, our talents, our money to work and to be effective. And so when I started looking around and saying, who does that? The answer for me was Save the Children, because the work is so impressive and extensive. And I have now been around the world to many of the programs. Carolyn and I have traveled together to some really scary places. And it is very, very encouraging to see the kind of work that we can do and how effective it can be. And there is a good news story in this report this year. And it's a good news story in, of all places, Afghanistan. So the great news about it is that it shows you that programs work, that things can make a difference, that, you know, that it's always a cop-out to just throw up your hands and say, it's too big a problem, I can't fix it. But it's also true that it can be fixed. And so I am eager to hear more in depth, as I know you are, from Carolyn and Roger about these issues and about this report in particular. Because as you know, these stories often are very depressing, and we're going to start off depressing.
Warning.
But we will move on to some good news stories. And the depressing part, which of course is the headline in this country, Carolyn, is where the United States ends up in this year's report.
So thanks, Koki. And I have to tell you that nobody puts up and shuts up like Koki in terms of putting her time and effort where her mouth is, because she has really been all around the world, not only with me, but with many people in Save the Children, to the ends of the earth. And she will do anything, including getting up at 4:30 this morning to be on the Channel 7 news about this report. She'll do anything for children.
That was, extensive. It was in depth.
So let me start with the U.S., and we'll talk about some of the success stories. So this is the 15th year that Save the Children has done the annual State of the World's Mothers Report. And one of the things that came out, I'll talk about the disasters and crisis piece in a minute, but one of the things that came out of the report this year is what's happened in the United States. And I think in a way it's a mirror of what's happening in the world. So the United States was fourth when we started doing this report in 2000. And this year, the United States is 31st. And that's tied for the lowest we've ever been. I think 2 years ago, we were also at 31st. The shocking thing about that, and it was mentioned, Margot mentioned it, I think earlier, is that the maternal mortality rate in the United States has actually gone up by 50% just in the last couple years. And that is really shocking. So there are 5 things in the index that drive the index: maternal mortality, child mortality, education of women, economic status of women, and political representation. And the U.S. does really well on education, relatively, education of girls, and on economic status of women, relative to the rest of the world. But we do poorly, very poorly, in terms of developed countries on maternal mortality, child mortality, and representation of women in our highest levels of government. The reason that matters is because if we have more women in Congress in the United States, they will pass policies that favor mothers and children. And we have 19% of Congress, and women are 51% of the United States.
Well, we have 20% of the Senate. Even I can do that math.
Yeah. So the United States were not there. And it's because of a couple of things. First of all, if I just focus on maternal mortality, there are a couple of factors, but it really has to do with where poor women are in terms of their access to basic health care and where they are in terms of their health. So what's driving maternal mortality? Mothers who come in with diabetes, hypertension, obesity, those are all things that are much higher in poor moms in the United States than in the rest of the population. Prenatal care that's available to poor mothers here in the United States looks nothing like the prenatal care that we all got as mothers. So it's a mirror of what's happening all across the world, this disparity in countries from the poorest to the most wealthy, and between poor countries and rich countries around the world. So that's really what's going on in the United States, and it's because, frankly, we do not value women and children the way we should in the U.S.
You know, to underline just today's news example of what Carolyn is talking about, yesterday, the 20 women in the Senate, and they are, by the way, the last bastion of bipartisanship in the Senate.
Yeah.
They actually do talk to each other. It's remarkable. And they got together, and all 20 of them signed a letter and went to the floor and made quite passionate speeches calling on our government to do a great deal more to release those girls who have been kidnapped in Nigeria. And it's just one of many examples of where women in power do make a difference. And another is in this question of response to disaster, which is our focus this year, because we've had so many of them.
We have.
And so during these crises, we see the horrible number of women and children are more likely in a war situation
Yes.
to be in danger than a soldier.
That's right. And again, in those 15 years, we looked at kind of who always ends up in the bottom of the 10 worst places to be a mom. And they tend to be places where you have conflict and natural disaster, or kind of both on top of each other. So very tough circumstances. And if you look at the bottom 10 in this year's ranking, 6 of them are in active conflict. They're all in Africa, by the way. And that's where you really have it worst as a mom. That's where it is absolutely hardest to be a mom. A couple of shocking statistics from the report this year. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where there is active conflict, a place I was about 6 months ago, it is actually more dangerous to be a mom or a child than an armed fighter. So many, many thousands of more mothers and children are dying in that conflict than are the combatants. So that's the kinds of things in that kind of situation. It is very difficult for moms. And I'll just give you 2 maybe quick stories from my travels about 2 moms who have been caught in crisis. One in Syria, and I have been to the region 3 times in the last year. We have massive programs in Syria and in all the surrounding countries there. And this was a mom who left. She was living in a place south of Damascus, and she left when she was 7 months pregnant because she said, I thought probably my hospital where I would have given birth wouldn't be there anymore. So I decided I had to get on the road and go. So she had a 2-year-old. Her husband was not there. He was involved in the conflict. He was not there. And so they left, and they spent about 7 days on the road. It's not a very long distance from where she lived to Jordan, where she ended up. Very large refugee camp there, but they could only travel at night. They could only travel at certain times of night when they knew it was safe. And she finally got to Zaatari, which is this giant refugee camp, about 90,000 people living in Jordan in a refugee camp. And she said, you know, I had my 2-year-old and I was living in a tent, and I went to there is health care in the refugee camp. She said, I gave birth, but, you know, the first time around, my mother-in-law was there, my mother was there. This time I was all alone. I had the baby in this tented hospital in the camp. And then I was sitting there, you know, really wondering what I should be doing. And that's a place, again, where Save the Children really runs programs for moms, and we had an infant young child feeding center there, and she went there where she could just sit with other mothers and get help with breastfeeding and get some extra food, because in this case, you know, keeping moms healthy and having enough food so they can keep breastfeeding, really,
Diapers.
really important. Diapers, baby, you know, baby clothes, just basic things that, that she needed. So that's one story. The second story is from the Philippines, and we just are coming up to the 6 months on the big typhoon that hit there in November of last year, and I was there at the 3-month anniversary and met a mom. This is now in natural disasters, the kinds of things that moms are dealing with, and this was Tacloban, which is the place where the typhoon literally kind of funneled into this town in the Philippines, and she said, we were in our house, and we knew the typhoon was coming. I was in the house with my husband, and we had 3 children, and we put the smallest ones on our shoulders because the water just kept rising and rising, and then we started standing on the table with our heads kind of up to the ceiling, and we couldn't go upstairs because we heard the roof being ripped off the top of our house. And she said, I don't know how to swim. My children didn't know how to swim. My husband knew how to swim, but he refused to leave, which was lucky. But those are the kinds of situations that you find that mothers find themselves in. And one of the things we're doing in the Philippines is we are working with mothers and with children so that we are really preparing them for emergencies. In a place like the Philippines, this happens a lot. So in many countries, we're teaching kids how to swim if it's susceptible to an emergency. We're teaching mothers, what is it about the warning system that you really have to know in terms of what does surge mean? How high could the water get? How far away do you need to go? Those are the basic things. And moms usually are not engaged and involved in the discussions about emergencies.
But that's again a place where we can really point to a success story, because in Bangladesh, when we were there, there had been a cyclone that had come through and killed 100,000 people, literally. And now we have preparedness things, and the last time it was hundreds of people, not hundreds. I mean, it was the difference was just dramatic because of preparedness. But it's also in this country, Carolyn. Talk about that. I mean, in the past year or 18 months, there've been like 50 disasters in this country.
That's right, and there are many things you probably wouldn't even hear about, but the tornadoes last week, for example, that are in Mississippi, Save the Children is responding there, and Oklahoma was a large response for us, and again, really focusing on our focus in emergencies in the U.S. is on child care centers particularly, and the reason we focus on that is because we know what we need to do to keep kids safe in child care centers. And we also know what we need to do to connect parents to child care centers and to help them all recover after an emergency. Really important for families to have some place, poor families particularly, where their kids can go after an emergency so they can go back to work. So Oklahoma was a very big response for us. And there's a really amazing video that if you have a chance to watch, it talks about a mom who left her child at a child care center on that day, and luckily the child care center staff was trained enough to know what to do for these kids, and literally they were huddled in a bathroom as the roof again got torn off in the tornadoes there, and the little girl was safe. But it's a great lesson, and right here in the United States, we need to do more to protect moms and children in emergencies.
And it's one we learned really after Katrina. You know, so Katrina happens, and I'm from New Orleans, so it's particularly affecting to me. And we went down, and there was nothing for the children. And so not only were they traumatized and out of school and seeing horrible things, they were then put in horrible situations that they should have never seen, and they were in danger. They were in danger of sexual abuse. They were in danger of all kinds of things. And so we have really learned that we have to be very, very vigilant about making sure that after one of these disasters happens, the children are taken care of and their moms have the ability to care for them.
That's right. And keeping kids safe both before, I mean, unfortunately, no one really cares much about emergencies until after they happen. And so it's very hard to get people to get excited about preparing for emergencies or really focus on preparing for emergencies. Very difficult. But we are doing that with child care centers, for example, in the United States, and working with the Red Cross inside shelters and training thousands of Red Cross workers actually on how do you help kids who end up in shelters. And it's always poor families who end up in shelters for more than a day. Nobody lives in a Red Cross shelter for more than a couple days if they don't have to, except for very poor families. So working with the Red Cross, we have a whole program now that really helps kids inside shelters and have a safe place to go.
Do you want to add anything here, Roger? I know your focus is more on nutrition, but we don't want to leave
Roger.
you out.
Thank you. No, I mean,
we just thought we should have a guy up here, you know.
Yeah, I'm the decoration or the eye candy, right? So that's I'll sit here and preen.
That's good. We like that.
No, I think that having the emphasis on the report and to hear Carolyn's explanations, I think is critical and fascinating. And even these reports have been so valuable for me, even at the time I was at the Wall Street Journal. So remember, it must have been one of the early ones, and was going through it and saw kind of the rankings of the countries. Went to the one at the bottom, it was Niger, and it was the worst place to be a mother and a child there. And it was like, my goodness, what's that like? What must the situation be like in Niger? So I talked to the editors. I said, this should be a fascinating story in itself. Here's the place, the worst place in the world to be a mother and a child. And they said, yeah, you know, kind of how quickly can you get there? And so I was dispatched to Niger, and it was.
You were kind of sorry you had brought it
Yeah,
up.
I said, what have I gotten myself into? And found it. Yeah, it was really, you know, wretched. In addition to kind of the conflict that goes on, there's just all sorts of cultural things and kind of socially forgotten and neglected communities and issues. Like the women standing in society and mothers standing and the child brides and the teen moms or 13-year-olds or so that are giving birth and everything in those societies. And that all then adds to it, and in terms of the conflict that comes with it. And with the disaster things that you were talking about, and the report also mentions this, I think resilience is really important, and SAVE, you know, really involved in that, and a lot of the organizations that are represented here, that, you know, disasters happen and you're knocked back some, but then the resilience that you can come back quickly from that, and then if it happens again, there's something to that you have around. And I think particularly in the developing world and in Africa or places in Asia, that there is no resilience. So something happens and they're just knocked back sometimes for a generation that it takes to recover. The other thing I was going to say when you were talking about, the news of this and the headline and the woeful state and position of the United States in this, is that it's really important and really valuable for this report to point out these things, because it reinforces that these aren't just problems and issues that are over there somewhere, that we'll see kind of in shady things on the news or when people actually focus on international events, but there are also issues and concerns that are here, and they're in our neighborhoods and our communities and our states, and have to be dealt with there. So that's why kind of when looking at the 1,000 days issue in the state of mothers and children from the pregnancy to the second birthday, of the countries that I'm looking at, so Uganda, India, Guatemala, and Carolyn and I traveled there, also here in the United States, and particularly in Chicago, because it is an issue and a time frame that is critically important for not only the well-being of the individuals, but for the economy and the workforce and the society.
Right.
And so
Well, I want to come back to that, because that is a very important issue. But let's go, since we've sort of skirted around it, we now know where the United States is in this report.
Yeah.
So tell us about the others. I mean, we do actually give countries grades.
We do. So we rank 178 countries. And as I said, it's on those 5 indicators: maternal mortality, child mortality, economic and educational status of women, and political representation. And I'll give you one tip. If you are a mom or want to be a mom, move to Scandinavia.
right.
Because that is the best. Pernilla is here from Denmark. That is the best place to be a mother, and they are always at the top of the rankings because they do well on all 5 of those indicators. And this year, Finland is at the top. It kind of goes between Finland, Norway, Sweden. They kind of trade off, but it's usually one of those Denmark, one of those Scandinavian countries. And then the other countries in the top 10 are in Europe. And the bottom 10 are all in Africa, as I said. The bottom is Somalia, which obviously is a place that's in deep crisis. And of that bottom 10, 6 of them are in active crisis. So there are places like the DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Central African Republic, Nigeria. Those are the bottom 10. And they do poorly on all 5 of those indicators. So there's really, they just don't hit any of those 5. There are a couple of good news stories, as Koki said, and there's Afghanistan. And Afghanistan has moved up, actually. So they were the worst place to be a mom just in 2010 and 11. And they have moved up 32 spots since that time. And they've done it, first of all, there are people inside of Afghanistan, and Save the Children does much work there with community health workers, for example. But there are people in Afghanistan that said, we don't want to be at the bottom of the worst place to be a mother. We're going to do something about that. And so they've done 3 things that have really moved the needle. One is they have worked on maternal mortality, and they have rolled out a lady health worker program, which focuses on midwives and community health workers, which are there for mothers where they're having their children and where their children are getting sick. And that's helping with maternal mortality and also child mortality. They're educating girls. So back to Koki's point on girls. Girls' education in Afghanistan, as in a couple of other key countries, is really starting to rise. And so they've been able to move the needle on that side. And then on, as I said, child mortality, that's come down because, again, of this focus on health. So it shows you that it's possible, even in a really difficult setting, to move the needle. The other good news story I'll talk about, and this is just, it's not a country in crisis, but it's a very poor country, Nepal. And again, they have been in the bottom 10 several times. The most recent was 2006. And there, the biggest difference actually came from people within the government, the Ministry of Health. And there were some key women and men who said, again, our kids don't have to die of these things. We can actually change this. And they rolled out a much bigger health system to try to get to the poorest rural communities, particularly. And they're on track to cut child mortality by 2/3, to really get maternal mortality way down, and they're a very poor country. So this isn't always about money. This is about will, and that's really what we saw.
In Afghanistan, though, I think we might be at a point of certainly inflection, and it might move on to crisis.
Yeah.
If with the withdrawal of American troops and the chaos surrounding the election, well, it's not actually chaos, that's unfair, the uncertainty surrounding the election. And I think that, you know, there's kind of an American desire to wash our hands of it, but
Yeah.
on the other hand, know that we have been there and been engaged. And so it seems to me that this is the time when we really need to stress the incredible importance of staying in there for this humanitarian work.
Well, and we've washed our hands in Afghanistan before. And
Right, absolutely.
Look where it got us.
Right.
Yeah, see
So,
what happened from that.
so hopefully we will have learned some lessons there. We are actively trying to get out some of the good news about Afghanistan, because I do think generally the American public thinks, you know, it's a disaster, and there hasn't been progress, but that actually, when you think about women and children and you look at the statistics, it's not true. So we're also trying to get some of that out there.
Because it really, you know, what's too awful is when you get retrogression. And we are seeing that in various places around the world.
Yep.
And we can make it so it doesn't happen there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You talk about the first 1,000 days, Roger, and that is something that we've been very involved in as well. And I think that's something to sort of talk to people about, because to me, what's so incredible about it is how easy it is. You know, it's cheap, it's easy, we know how to do it. It just, again, this is a question not of money,
No.
It's a question of doing it.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the things are just very simple,
Right.
and instinctive in terms of you know, simple sanitation things that are in there. You know, when I started out the reporting, it was really focused on the importance of nutrition in the 1,000 days, and that's vital. And the nutrition, both for the mom, and a diversified diet for the mother when she's pregnant. That then transferred to the child through the breastfeeding, and then for the child during the complementary feeding and everything else that goes up to, say, the second birthday, and then beyond. You know, and that's really important. But then I was talking to people, both the moms and the families themselves, but then the people, the academics, the scientists, and people that are looking at that, and they said, look, even in areas where there is abundant food, where there is abundant nutrition. You certainly see that in Guatemala, which is this huge paradox of kind of a very verdant country. They are growing the broccoli and Brussels sprouts for our whole food stores and for the American market.
Kale, a lot of kale.
Right.
A lot of kale.
A lot of kale coming from there.
A lot of kale.
But yet they have the worst malnutrition and stunting rates in the Americas. In our hemisphere. And so how does that add up? And so it's not only, it's not the presence of food and even the nutrients and the minerals and vitamins and the proper food for that, but then it's the whole environment and the wash effort, so the water, sanitation, and hygiene, that the effort is to get the nutrients in the body, but then to keep them there. Not that there's illness and then they're all washed out, or that kind of a parasitic overload, that it's the parasites that are then consuming the nutrients and things as opposed to the host body. So my reporting kind of expands every trip that I take, and it's quite fascinating on that front, and environmental enteropathy and kind of what is going on in the gut and the gut biome, and I'm learning kind of far too kind of weird
they're
things.
At lunch.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the lunch hopefully is settled by now. I don't hear. It's always difficult to talk about these things when you're hearing the knives and the forks clashing. But those things, and in simple education. And so what I'm finding, kind of wherever I go, and it can be on a veranda of a clinic, or under a tree in Africa, or on the stoops of houses in India, or in a living room here in the United States. The messaging and the education is the same wherever you go. It's kind of the same nutritional information. It's the same kind of health and cleanliness thing, and there's just simple advice for the mothers and the children. And then you realize that this is information that just hasn't gotten to people. Or it's also the accessibility of it, that, yeah, we understand we're supposed to eat our fruits and vegetables, and we're being told this now by this new education that is spreading, and it's education in songs and drama and things to convey that, but that it's a matter of accessibility and affordability. And so it was remarkable that at one stage that I was doing these trips, and every place that I was at, except Uganda, they were all complaining about the cost of apples. Says, what's going on with apples? And in Uganda, where they wouldn't really have apples, they're complaining about the cost of other things. And then this report comes out from the International Food Policy Research Institute, and it's specifically focused on India, and there they showed there was a chart that had a huge escalation in the price of fruits and vegetables. And I said, those moms on the stoop that were complaining about the cost of apples and fruits and vegetables, we know we're supposed to eat those, but then there's this gap there. And I think then bridging that gap, because otherwise thinking, gee, this book could basically be done in one sentence, or in one paragraph, and it would be, it turns out your mother was right. Eat your vegetables and wash your hands.
So much?
Right? And I figured, okay, well, that'll get me through one page. But then it's all the complications of that message and all these things then getting implemented and across, and then put into play.
You talked about Uganda, and there you've dealt with the Lord's Resistance Army and the effect on mothers and children.
Yeah, and I think that's critical. So as one talks about, and a report focusing on conflict areas and the violence and the impact that has on mother and children, and they are in the front lines of that, and particularly when you think of, say, conflict in these areas that'll take place, say primarily in the rural areas. Well, the moms in most of these places are also the farmers, and their crops are destroyed. Food becomes a weapon of conflict and of repression in a lot of these places. And in Darfur and in South Sudan, it becomes a tool of the genocide and the mayhem that's going on. And then you have the conflict, and even a generation or decades after the conflict subsides and some kind of peace or more security settles in, you still see the impact of that stretching on for decades and generations. So in this area of northern Uganda, around Lira, which is close to Gulu, where they had the night commuters and the children going back and forth, and the villages just disappearing and coming into the more urban areas, and then going back when it was safe again, that even now, after all this time, you're dealing with issues of trust, of outsiders, of people coming in, of advice that may be given to them. You find that the mothers, for so long, wouldn't even dare dream about the possibilities of what their children could achieve because they were so involved with the immediacy of mere survival. And this case in Nigeria, this last trip that I was there just several weeks ago, went and visited the Assoc girls' school, the Catholic school where 139 girls were just spirited and abducted away, and one of the nuns ran after them into the bush. And so a very a sad and horrific story of what happens. But then the after effect of this then just goes on. I think that's one of the things in terms of the state of the world's mothers and the children, is that heavily impacted by conflict, by violence, but then even years after and generations after, or even in areas where there hasn't been recent conflict, it's kind of the daily crisis period that women find themselves at. And so say women farmers in Africa who are unable to grow enough food to feed their children, and they descend into this hunger season. The hunger season, that is a conflict period amongst the family and the mothers themselves. And what I saw there among these farmers, particularly the ones in Western Kenya, and the moms, they feel, since they're the farmers, that they're failing on two fronts. They're failing as farmers because they're not able to grow enough food to feed their families, but they're failing as moms because they're raising malnourished kids.
Right.
And there I saw that in this time of profound deprivation in the hunger season, the deepest form of misery was to be a mother unable to silence the crying of a hungry child.
Because it's so basic.
Exactly.
Feeding your child.
And
But
again, it's simple
Carol?
solutions that we know what to do about, and it's just degalvanizing people, and let's get at it.
Well, and you said something about strangers coming in, and one of the things that we do is we don't send in strangers.
No, no, we don't. I mean, just a couple things about Roger's work. First of all, Roger is like the most fun person to go and travel with. So if you ever get a chance, go with him. By the end of the day, in a market where we had like 8 street kids following us, and Roger had to buy all of them snacks by the end.
Ice cream
It was
cones,
great,
right?
and he's tall, so they can always see him wherever he is. It was great. But one of the things that's so important about the work that he's doing on 1,000 Days, and a lot of this is things that Save the Children does in the programs we do, is it's not just about that this is a child who's hungry and doesn't have enough to eat. If children don't get the right nutrition from the time of conception to the second year, their second birthday, they never catch up. Their brains are stunted, their bodies are stunted. Right. You can't kind of start feeding a child at 2 and that's okay, we'll make up for it when they get older. It doesn't happen. The science isn't there. We all know this. We learned about this years ago, and somehow we didn't think that it related to brains of kids in Uganda and Guatemala. Well, it's the same science, and so you cannot make up for that. So when it comes to not only kids surviving, and malnutrition is a huge underlying factor in child mortality. So a child gets sick that's malnourished, they are much more likely to die. So it's about survival, but it's also about thriving. Right. It's about kids being able to actually use and have all the opportunities that they should have, and if they don't get the right nutrition in that 2 year, that 1,000 days, it's not going to happen.
And it's not just food nutrition; it's also mental nutrition. Mm-hmm. And again, we see this right here at home. I mean, I was here yesterday, and there's a program trying to get to kids who are in shelters in Chicago, because it is so important to make sure that they, as preschoolers, have some ability to see a book.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference in terms of the brain science. So it's very important to get in there with little bit.
And to your point, Koki, in terms of how you do this, it is with people who live in the community. Right. It's not with, it's not people like me that go and work in the programs that Save the Children has. The vast majority of our staff, 99% of our staff outside the United States are people from those countries. So that's who's going to make the difference. A local
But even
woman,
in the United States,
it's from there.
In Appalachia,
Yep.
it is.
It's people from that community.
Trust me, you go from Chicago to Appalachia, they're not going to listen to a word you say.
No, Yeah, one thing I was going to say or add about, I think the stunting and the malnutrition, and particularly in the 1,000 days, is I think one of the most appalling realities in our world today is that 1 of every 4 children in the world is stunted in some manner, physically or mentally. And think of the impact of it. The impact spreads like tossing a stone into a pond and these ripples form. It is the ripples that then stem from that. It's the impact on the individual and the child. Stunted children become stunted adults. their lack of educational performance, how far they go in school, their ability to
Be
find work.
productive members of the society, right.
Exactly. And the wages that they have. It impacts the family because it's one less full wage earner. It impacts the entire community, the countries. And so the economic research that's now going on, that you started kind of with the report that you guys had done in 1,000 days, is it can impact 5 to 17% of the gross national product of these countries. Why do some countries stay poor? It's because their children are stunted and malnourished.
Even when Carolyn and I were in Vietnam last year, and it's now considered a middle-income country, and those children are stunted.
Yep.
But Carolyn, I
well,
want
and
to
in
talk-
India, I mean,
Right.
India leads the world in stunting and malnutrition, and it is. And think of all that we associate with India. The last trip I was in India, it was the big news. The headlines in the news was they were talking about a space mission to Mars,
Right.
and it's like, why? I mean, it's with all the problems, and they went. And then somebody very cynically said, yes, it is a place where the malnourished can, where they'll find some kind of super thing up there or something.
But
So
I want to get back to the report itself, though, because one of the places that you have spent an enormous amount of time and psychic energy is with the Syrian refugees, and that, even though they're not at the bottom of them, it is what, 1 million children that have been affected?
More than 1 million refugees who are children. So there's about 2.5 million refugees, and more than 1 million are children.
And the ripple effects of that.
Yeah. Well, I think Syria is sadly an example of what can happen in a crisis really amplified. Because if you look at Syria, and we've been working there now on this crisis for 3 years, it was a middle-income country.
Right.
Had a well-functioning health system. Children were immunized. Children were well cared for. There was malnourishment rates were very low.
And they were educated.
There was no polio. Kids were going to school. And so now it is literally inside Syria, we now have kids who are dying of malnutrition. They are starving to death, children. And this would never have happened in a place like Syria, and it is because of the conflict. And in Aleppo, there were something like 2,600 doctors. There's now 35 in all of the town, so all of the city. So this is a real example of what can happen to a country. It can literally go from a developing, progressing country to a complete shambles in the space of 3 years. And that's really what's happened in Syria. And so our work there is really focused on, first of all, working with refugees in the 5 countries surrounding Iraq and Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey and Egypt to some extent, and then working inside on very basic things, just very food, water, basic health supplies, trying to get those to the, to the poorest families, because that's really what it's all about at this point in Syria. It's about survival.
Well, we want to turn this over to you all to ask some questions. So while you're thinking, yes, all right, somebody's already got a hand up over there.
They're jumping to it already.
Sorry, if you wouldn't mind just waiting for the mic so everyone can hear. Thank you.
Right
There's a
behind
mic coming behind you.
As we've been listening to you, you've been talking about issues that are prevalent all over the world, whether we're talking about south side of Chicago or Syria. And all of them, whether you're talking about emergency preparedness, obesity issues, access to food, access to health care, all have to do, in my mind, and I think with many of us, with political policy and political priorities. Because without those being in the right place, none of this is going to improve greatly in any of the countries we're talking about. Haiti, for example, has over 10,000 NGOs operating, and for many, many years, and they've shown very little improvement over time,
Well,
whether it's from lack of cooperation or collaboration or whatever. Basically, it still boils down to political priorities and political policy. So I would like to hear you talk about that issue. To me, that's the biggest issue, whether we're talking about Chicago, Syria, Lebanon, wherever. And if we don't change policy and priority, none of this is going to matter.
Let me just do a little correction on Haiti, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about Haiti. Yes, there have been 10,000 NGOs. 999 of them, 9,000 of them are, no, 9,999 of them are little teeny-weeny NGOs that have been there that really are not doing much. There's a lot of very good work going on in Haiti, and we've done, I mean, I've been there seeing it, and people are getting educated, are getting health care. The government is a mess. That's absolutely true, but that's been true for 200 years. And so I don't think we should just sort of throw up our hands and say we can't fix it in Haiti. It is good things are happening in Haiti. And in terms of policy, and I'll turn it over to you all, but yes, policy is tremendously important, but you can also do a lot of things. You can have the right policy and nothing happens, and you can have no policy and do things. And so, you know, again, my big concern always about these things is that people will say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. That government's a mess, or there's no will, or and actually there is something you can do about it. And that's what we're about doing, is getting in there and doing it. So Bangladesh, for instance, I mean, what you have to do in Bangladesh is have these wonderful young women walk hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles every day to get into the villages to do the healthcare work. So the policy isn't really the problem. It is the difficulty of actually delivering the services. And we do it, but it's not easy. So I wouldn't put it all off on government policy. It's just difficult.
I would say you do have to have both. I think, and Save the Children works at the ground level. We also work at trying to change the policies. But as Koki said, there's many countries around the world where we've got policies. They're there. They just never get implemented. So the real trick is, how do you get those policies actually implemented? That's the big piece. And that's, you know, Save the Children spends a lot of time trying to connect those things. The policy's up here, and the implementation is down here, and how do we actually get those things to work? So they're both important, and Haiti, we would be doing a lot better if we had a government that could actually function and help drive some of those things. But there are things you can do on the ground in the meantime. But the big win, and the place where Nepal, perfect example, we had both. We had political will at the top, and we had implementation of this massive frontline health worker program at the bottom, and the connection was there, and that's how you got it kind of to scale. So we need both.
I was also going to say the aspect, and Koki had mentioned this, community empowerment, and that, you know, and even family empowerment, and mother and women empowerment, that you can change situations yourself, kind of no matter what your government is. Because that's one of the things I'm asking the women, both on previous reporting projects and this, is, well, what do you see impact from the government in your lives? Is there any of their great policies that they have on this, any impact to you? They say, no, basically nothing, but they're taking it upon themselves to rally around an effort like driving down maternal mortality, they can see the stunting in their communities when they learn about that and the implication of it, and them rallying around that and empowering themselves to, let's do something about this ourselves in the realm of what is capable for us to do.
But you see that in this country too. I mean, that's what the Women's Foundation is all about. I mean, you see that.
Absolutely, right. That it's again, it's not just something that needs to happen over there, but that you know is vital for also getting things done here.
Great, thank you. Yes, the woman right here, please, in the back.
I had a question for you when you started talking about Bangladesh and some of the countries that Europeans and Americans are manufacturing.
Why don't you get the mic a little closer?
A little closer?
Yeah, that's
okay.
good. Thanks.
Sorry, I needed a reporter to tell me that.
All right.
It just made me think when you started mentioning Bangladesh, Cambodia, some of these countries that American and European manufacturers are now expanding into. Are you now working closely with Americans and European companies to try to illustrate to them this cause? Because I think that would go a lot further as well.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that, and we've got some of our partners I know even in the room today. And we are finding that working with American business or European businesses, developed country businesses who are now, their biggest markets are these emerging countries, and that's where the growth is for many, many of these companies. And so finding that place where the things that we care about for children and the things that business cares about, where that intersection is the trick. And we've got some great, I'll give you one really great example. Unilever is a partner of ours. And we talked about hygiene earlier, getting people to wash their hands, getting kids to wash their hands around the world. It's not a habit that many, many countries have. And
especially
you'll go,
boys.
yeah. And you'll go and wash your hands, and they'll kind of look at you like, oh, that quaint thing that those European and Americans do, washing their hands. There's no connection between the germs on your hands and me eating or going to the bathroom or any of those things. It's not there. So trying to teach people how to wash their hands, and particularly kids. And we have a massive program with Unilever to teach kids how to wash their hands. Well, Unilever loves it because it sells soap. They make Lifebuoy. So they give us lots of free soap, but we're building a future market. We love it because kids die of things like diarrhea, right? They die of that. So for us, that's a huge win. We get kids to learn how to wash their hands, we reduce child mortality. They get kids to learn how to wash their hands, they sell soap. Great.
It is.
Yeah, on how to wash their
Thank
hands.
you.
But
Yep.
the working with business is absolutely something that we do, and everybody does. I mean, Pernille Spears-Lopez, who set up this wonderful lunch, thank you very, very much, great job, was IKEA, and we've worked with IKEA for years and years and years. And I remember in Azerbaijan, Exxon was building a pipeline, and they knew that was going to be an issue, so they worked with us on all kinds of programs to sort of make people like them better.
Well, not blow up the pipeline, right?
Yeah, right there, please. The lady in the red and white dress. Thank you. The mic's right behind you, Betsy.
Thank you. I'm curious about the countries that perform well in this report year after year, and would be interested in hearing if you think it's things about their culture that are embedded that value women and children in a different way, or if they're constantly taking action to improve. And if so, are any of those actions and best practices exportable to other situations?
So I would say some of them are actions. So I'll give you an example. Most Scandinavian countries, I think I mentioned it before, political representation of women in their parliaments, it's in the high 40s, right? We're at 19%. They're at 46, 45, 48%. Very, almost, what's that? It's
Thank you. Thank you.
But where do they use the money? Okay? Yes, it's money, but they have to make the choices to use the money for things that benefit women and children. So I don't disagree with you. It's about money. But if you've got women who are making those policies and those decisions, that money is going to go to women and kids. And so that is a huge piece.
Thank you. Yes, the lady, please, at the back table with the glasses.
Hi, the status of women and mothers around the world is actually quite precarious.
Could you speak into the mic, please?
Sorry. The status of women and mothers around the world is obviously precarious, and if you go through the history of the reports that you've done, there's data there to support that. Are you worried at all about the backslide that's likely to happen, given that the highlighting of the MDGs is about to come to an end?
I think explain what the MDGs are. These are the millennial, word I never say on the radio, development goals. And they have a whole series of them, and the UN and governments and non-governmental organizations have all unified to try to hit various targets that have been set up as millennial development goals, and that's the MDGs.
Yeah, that's a good question, a good thought. I know a lot of people are consumed with this at the moment, that what comes post-MDG or post-2015. And those goals, they focus the world's attention then on those 8 goals. And on this front, it's reducing maternal mortality, mother health, getting kids into universal primary education of 3 of the 8 in particular. And it's, that, okay, when we get to 2015, that can't be an end process, and we kind of pat ourselves on the back and say, okay, well, we did good on these goals, and frankly, on a number of the goals, they're quite a ways from achieving the levels, particularly on ending hunger and poverty reduction. And so now there's kind of this battle lines forming of what are should there be a new set of goals after that? What do we need to concentrate the world's attention on? And so how long would those goals be? A big push to get nutrition in there, to get some mention of the 1,000 days in there. Again, the precarious status of women in the world, and to strengthen all those things. And so to take a fresh look at that set of goals as they kind of get to their deadline, and what do we move forward with in a new set of goals. The danger with that is that there's the focus on them, and so just one, and I would hear this frequently in Africa, that now there's the focus on universal primary education. That's great, but then all these kids, they're in primary schools, hooray, but then they want to go to secondary school. And gee, well, there's hardly any secondary schools around. There's no teachers. And so, well, now what do we do? And so it kind of skew development efforts or something? But it concentrates the mind, at least, on these issues.
Yeah, I think, so Save the Children, and then I spend a fair amount of time on this issue in particular, and I think the biggest challenge will be actually to get a framework around equity into these goals going forward, because the Millennium Development Goals have been really helpful in, as Roger said, focusing our minds. So one that we've spent a lot of time on is reducing child mortality by 2/3. That was the big global goal. Can we get there? And many countries have gotten there and many have not. But what it's done is it's left the poorest kids behind. Because if I'm a country and that's my goal, I'm going to go to the place where I know I can reduce child mortality the easiest. And that's the easier places to go. So getting this idea of every child actually deserves to live, right? Every child deserves to live. We need to get child mortality to 0. Not to 2/3. We need to get it to 0. We need every child to go to primary school. So our push is really focusing on getting those goals to be 0-based. And it actually, I can see that we could actually end preventable deaths of kids while I'm still alive. I could definitely see it. It's possible. If you look at the curve and you look at how it could go, we could do it. But we got to focus on the poorest kids.
It's not that hard.
So.
Great. Time for one last quick question, please, at this IWA table. Jill, right there. Thank you.
Could each of you tell us more about the decision tree that your organizations use to allocate resources, especially as you wrestle between these problems globally and internationally, and locally, globally and locally?
Well, I didn't hear
How do we make the decision on where do we put our resources? I think is kind of what you were asking. So with great difficulty, I would say. It's probably the hardest thing in Save the Children to say we're not going to do that. There's these things we're not going to do because a couple of reasons. One, there's somebody in our organization who's probably really passionate about whatever that thing is that we say we're not going to do. Two, whatever it is probably a real need for children. And to say we're not going to serve that need is difficult. Whether that's about we're not going to work in that country or we're not going to do, water in that village, right? It's very hard to do. But I would say that we've gotten better at saying these are all issues, but the things that we can specifically do something about, Save the Children, where are we really best at doing those? And let's get somebody else to come and do some of those other things. And so we are doing a lot more partnership now than we ever did, and that's helping us make those decisions. But we first look at where the need is. So where is the need, and we look at the indicators on education and on health and on child mortality and maternal mortality, and we prioritize. And so there are 24 countries that make up 90% of child mortality in the world. We focus our child mortality work in those 24 countries.
But it's also true that a lot of the work that we've done over the decades has been in disaster relief. So you get into a country get into Pakistan after the earthquake. I use that one because I was right there. So you set up, a camp, a refugee camp for everybody, and then it's just remarkable what happens, right? The Danes say, wait, we've got warm tents. And the Chinese say, we've got tin roofs. And, so everybody works together. Some of the groups are a little sketchy, but it's okay. And, UNICEF says we can set up the school. And so what happens is everybody starts cooperating and working together, and you get to know, and now it's much more conscious because after the disaster, then we stay and do development work. And so it becomes much more conscious that this group is good at water, this group is good at housing, we're really good at education, health, and nutrition. And we do the other, and women's empowerment. Those are the things we're especially good at. We do other stuff, but those are the things we're especially good at. You know, so different people do different things, and the cooperation is terribly important, which is why this lunch is so important. And Pernille putting this together is terrific, because as I understand it, you've never all come together as various organizations to do this before. And this is a really important thing to do, because you all can learn from each other what each one of your groups is particularly good at, and then work with each other to fill in the blanks. And I think that's just terrific, and I really hope that this is the beginning of a wonderful partnership among all of you. So,
and on this note, thank you to our panelists for their time today. To echo Cokie Roberts' thoughts and that of all the people, we have membership tables for all 4 organizations outside. Thank you so much to Save the Children, Chicago Foundation Women, and International Women's Associates. Thank you, and happy Mother's Day.